Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Cube Tuesdays. Today we're going over a cool new archetype that has been around for a little bit that I've just put in my own cube. Today we're going to be talking about wheels. So, firstly, what is the wheel archetype and what is it trying to do? So, in a nutshell, what it's trying to do is take a wheel effect, something that makes both players discard their hand, draw 7 cards. Sometimes you shuffle your graveyard into your library before you draw 7 cards, that kind of thing. You're trying to combine that with an effect that punishes your opponents when you do that. So the idea is you draw a fresh new hand of 7 cards and your opponent doesn't, or if they do, they're punished heavily for it. Now this is an archetype that's got a lot stronger in recent years. For quite a while we've had draw 7s with things like Time Twister and Wheel of Fortune. To go with those, recently we've had cards like Commit to Memory and then Echo of Eons. Those are the ones that I've personally been running and had the most success with. There are other ones out there. There's something like Time Spiral, and there's some more budget options with things like Diminishing Returns, Game Plan, and Time Reversal. These cards, all in some way, make both players discard their hand and draw 7 new cards. It's the cards that punish your opponents when you do this that have got the most love in the last couple of years. You have things like Hull Breacher, Narset Parter of Veils, Leovold, Emissary of Trest, and Notion Thief here. These all stop your opponents from drawing any extra cards, while also importantly making them discard their hands, stripping them completely of any resources. This can be extremely backbreaking in a game of Magic, as you will end up with a full grip of cards, while your opponent will maybe have 1 at best, but most of the time they'll end up with no cards in hand. If you specifically have something like Hull Breacher out, you will end up with 7 treasures, 7 cards in your hand, and your opponent will end up with nothing. Or if you have a card like Notion Thief out, you will end up with 14 cards in your hand and your opponent will end up with nothing. That is truly fantastic, for at least you anyway. The main card that's been printed recently that's pushed this strategy over the edge for me and made me want to include it in my own cube is Sheoldred the Apocalypse. With all the others, you will likely be winning the games of Magic where you get off this nice cool little interaction, as you will just have so much more resources than your opponent. The biggest difference with Sheoldred is that you're most likely winning there on the spot. If you wheel with Sheoldred the Apocalypse out, your opponent will take 14 damage and you will gain 14 life. That is truly insane and is effectively a 2-card combo win condition. I like the fact that it has the ability to kill someone instantly. You don't have the protracted game of Magic where someone isn't doing anything. That is really cool. And what's really nice about this package is that these cards go naturally into any kind of blue-black control deck. Maybe you want to splash green, maybe you want to splash red. Those kind of decks already exist in most cubes, as black is really good at killing things and blue is really good at countering spells, and together they are just really good at controlling the board. In these kind of control decks, both individual pieces will do some kind of work. The creatures will shut off any other kind of card advantage that your opponent might have. It'll shut off things like their brainstorms or their ponders or any other kind of way that they have of drawing additional cards. And then a lot of the times, the wheel effects can just be really handy. There will be times where you don't want to wheel your hand, especially against like an aggro opponent who's already spewed out a load of creatures onto the board and has got ahead of you. You don't really want to be giving them more gas at that point. But in like a mid-range matchup or against another control deck, if you have one of these in your hand, it means you can be a bit more proactive. You can play out your spells, you can play out your creatures, and then wheel. Both players will draw 7 and you'll come out ahead of this because you've already played more spells. Also, wheeling, if your hand isn't good enough, can be a fine strategy. It can really muck up your opponent's hands as they won't be expecting it. The wheels that shuffle graveyards into libraries before both players draw 7 can also be really good answers to Reanimator and any other graveyard-based strategies. This was another main reason why I added it to my own cube, because I've basically been finding a lot that Reanimator has become far too strong, and I'm not a fan of putting in specific sideboard cards into a cube, but the fact that these allow something new and cool to come into the cube while also giving it answers for a strong strategy is really, really nice. And then it's also probably worth mentioning that these draw 7s are quite strong if you are running Storm. This is where Time Twister probably shines the most here because it untaps 6 lands as well. This is also probably how the archetype got a foothold in a lot of more powerful cubes because they were already running a lot of these wheel effects for Storm, and then as these hateful cards like Leovold and Hull Breacher got printed, it kind of blossomed into its own proper archetype. When I added this archetype to my own cube, I basically cut the least effective blue-black control cards and was able to find plenty of room for these spells. I basically cut like some generic blue or black creatures and cut like the worst Doomblade, the worst counterspell. It's only like 6 or 7 cards that you need to add. There's definitely room for this in a lot of cubes out there. In terms of some other cards that you might already be running in your cube that will help the strategy out, the main one is Consecrated Sphinx. This is a perfectly fine top-end card for a blue control deck. It's a big flyer, it can hit face, we love that. But with the wheel effects, doubling up the amount of cards that you are drawing will be really, really strong. It's a nice bit of redundancy for that strategy. Okay, so these cards are in your cube. How do you go about drafting it as a deck? Well, what's really nice about this strategy is that it's almost one that you can fall into, as it were. It's not hard to imagine a cube draft where you've taken some early blue or black spells, maybe some good interaction, like counter spells, removal, hand attack, that kind of thing. Maybe a Snapcaster Mage was the best thing in the first pack. So as a deck, you're already leaning towards being slow, more control-y. Then as the packs go around, if from about pick 7 or 8 in pack 1 you see a premium wheel effect or a payoff, I'm talking like Time Twister, Echo of Eons, Hull Breacher or Notion Thief, then it's a pretty good sign that the deck is open. You can take the wheels and the payoffs when you want, but what's nice is that not too many other people will be after them, so you're not really fighting anyone for these cards. So maybe in pack 2, for example, you take a Ledger Shredder first and then wheel a Commit to Memory, that kind of thing. The one card that if you're in a blue-black shell that you just snap off straight away is Shieldred. That card is the main one that will just get in your deck even if you don't get there with the wheel strategy. It's also the one card I would want to see nice and early if I was forcing this strategy. In terms of the rest of the deck that you're looking to make up, you're just looking for like good creatures, some good counter magic interaction, maybe a board wipe or two that will come in handy, and some good cheap card selection. And then like in any good control deck, a big dumb way of winning the game. So you drafted the deck, how does it actually play? So in terms of play pattern, it plays like a control deck. You're going to be trading resources with your opponent at the aim to come out ahead, by keeping the board in check and not taking too much damage early. Ideally, you'd want to get one of the payoffs down first, something like a Hull Breacher or a Narset. And then when it's down, preferably keep up some counter magic to help protect it. Then as soon as you get that opportunity, you cast your wheel effect. When this happens, you will basically be so far ahead of your opponent in terms of resources available to you that you've basically won the game. It might take a bit of time, especially if your opponent already has a board state, but you've drawn 7 cards, maybe more, and your opponent at best has 1 card in hand. If you drafted interaction and a board wipe and a big way of winning the game, you will win the game at that point. As we've mentioned, the main thing that you could have trouble against is someone playing a lot of cheap aggressive creatures who get a board state out before you can do your thing. Damn those pesky mono-red players. Again, this is something that you can address in the draft. Something like a Toxic Deluge or a Thing in the Ice do great work here. So with the deck built and playing, how powerful is it? When this comes together, this is extremely powerful. It could be one of the most powerful archetypes in any cube that it is in. Blue control is already very good. Adding this to it tops it up and takes it to a whole new level. Like, this is a good deck in the Mitgo Vintage Cube and will be strong in everything that it's running there downwards. So on that topic, what type of cubes can you expect to see this in and what type of cubes would it work in? If I'm honest, this needs to be in a high-powered cube environment. That doesn't mean it has to be technically powered. Like, I run it in mine and I don't have power in mine. I mean, technically Time Twister is a powered card, but for the point of cube, I view it as power being the rest of the power 9 and other fast mana and things like Skull Clamp. Like, you could technically add this strategy to a budget cube, like Hull Breacher, Narset, Notion Thief, Leovold, Embassy of Trest are actually quite cheap. 2 of those cards are quite cheap because they were banned in Commander for being too strong, and while Time Twister and Wheel of Fortune are very expensive, like you can just proxy them, that's what I've done in mine, it's fine. But wheels like Commit to Memory, Diminishing Returns, Game Plan, and Time Reversal aren't really that expensive in the grand scheme of things. But if I'm honest, I think this is too strong to go in a budget cube. It's kind of like if you added Soul Ring to a budget cube. Like, technically you could, because it is a budget card because of all the reprints that it's had, but it would still be the strongest card in the cube because you're not going to have as much fast mana to kind of interact with it. That is my worry with this archetype in a lower powered level setting, is that it'll just be better than everything else in it. But if you have the power level of cube that you think could run this, I would definitely consider proxying up some of these cards and give it a go. I don't think you'll be disappointed. It opens a whole new archetype, a whole new strategy, and really interesting gameplays. So that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you all very much for watching. Do like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.